On the surface, Sylvia Likens' story is one of innocence, youth, and unfulfilled dreams. Born on January 3, 1949, Sylvia Marie Likens was a lively and compassionate teenager with a penchant for laughter and a deep love for her siblings. Her parents, Lester and Betty Likens, worked as carnival laborers, often traveling and struggling to make ends meet. This transient lifestyle meant that Sylvia and her siblings were sometimes left in the care of relatives or acquaintances. In the summer of 1965, this arrangement took a dark and sinister turn when Sylvia and her younger sister, Jenny, were placed under the guardianship of Gertrude Baniszewski, a neighbor who promised to look after the girls while their parents worked on the road. Gertrude Baniszewski was a 37-year-old single mother with 7 children of her own. Struggling with poverty, health issues, and the weight of her own life's misfortunes, Gertrude was far from an ideal caregiver. Yet, she presented herself as a responsible adult capable of providing a stable home for Sylvia and Jenny. The Likens family, desperate for stability and with few other options, agreed to pay Gertrude $20 per week for the girls' upkeep. This seemingly simple arrangement would unravel into one of the most shocking and harrowing cases of abuse in American history. At first, the girls settled into Gertrude's household without much incident. They attended school, helped with household chores, and tried to adapt to their new environment. However, the veneer of normalcy quickly cracked as financial struggles strained the arrangement. When the Likens parents' payments were delayed, Gertrude's frustration boiled over into physical abuse. What began as verbal scolding and minor punishments escalated into brutal beatings, marking the start of an unimaginable ordeal for Sylvia. Sylvia became the primary target of Gertrude's growing wrath. The reasons for this targeting remain unclear, though many speculate that Sylvia's vivacious personality and physical appearance may have incited jealousy in Gertrude, who was embittered by her own hardships. Gertrude's anger was not limited to her own actions. She began to enlist her children and even neighborhood kids to participate in the abuse. Sylvia's younger sister, Jenny, who suffered from polio and wore a leg brace, was also subjected to mistreatment, though her physical limitations often spared her from the worst of the violence. The cruelty inflicted upon Sylvia defied comprehension. She was denied food, beaten with belts and paddles, and burned with cigarettes. The abuse soon escalated to psychological torment. Gertrude spread malicious lies about Sylvia, accusing her of being promiscuous and unclean, in an effort to justify the inhumane treatment. Neighbors and children who visited the Baniszewski home were encouraged to take part in the abuse, turning the house into a grotesque spectacle of collective cruelty. One of the most horrifying aspects of Sylvia's ordeal was the calculated and systematic nature of her torture. Gertrude seemed to revel in her power over the girl, using the excuse of discipline to mask her sadistic impulses. She devised increasingly cruel punishments, including forcing Sylvia to eat her own vomit and subjecting her to scalding baths. The abuse culminated in Sylvia being confined to the basement, where she was starved, beaten, and left to endure unimaginable suffering. Throughout her ordeal, Sylvia's spirit remained remarkably resilient. She continued to show kindness to her sister and attempted to maintain hope despite the overwhelming darkness surrounding her. Tragically, her cries for help went unheard. Attempts to alert outsiders were thwarted by Gertrude's manipulations, and the neighborhood's indifference allowed the abuse to continue unchecked. Sylvia's deteriorating condition became evident to those who visited the Baniszewski home, yet no one intervened, a chilling reminder of the consequences of apathy. The events leading up to Sylvia's death were as horrific as they were heartbreaking. By October 1965, her injuries were so severe that she could no longer speak or move. On October 26, after months of relentless torture, Sylvia Likens succumbed to her injuries. She was just 16 years old. When Sylvia's body was discovered, The extent of her injuries shocked even the most seasoned investigators. The coroner's report detailed over 150 wounds on her body, including burns, bruises, and cuts. Her death was ruled a homicide, and the subsequent investigation uncovered the full extent of the atrocities committed against her. The arrest and trial of Gertrude Baniszewski and her accomplices brought national attention to the case. The details of Sylvia's suffering were laid bare in court, revealing a disturbing portrait of unchecked evil and societal failure. Gertrude was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, though she was paroled after serving only 20 years. Several of the children involved received lesser sentences, sparking outrage among those who felt that justice had not been adequately served. Sylvia's story continues to haunt and inspire, serving as a stark reminder of the vulnerability of children and the devastating consequences of abuse. It is a case that compels us to ask difficult questions about responsibility, community, and the enduring scars of trauma. Sylvia Likens' tragic death sent shockwaves through the nation, prompting a mix of horror, outrage, and profound introspection. Her story became a rallying cry for reform, exposing the glaring gaps in child welfare systems and the devastating consequences of societal neglect. As investigators pieced together the horrifying details of her final months, they unraveled a tapestry of complicity and cruelty that extended far beyond the confines of Gertrude Baniszewski's dilapidated home. The trial that followed was a spectacle of justice and horror. Gertrude Baniszewski, her children, and several neighborhood accomplices were charged with various crimes ranging from first-degree murder to aggravated assault. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of a household where cruelty was normalized and where Sylvia's suffering became a grotesque form of entertainment. The defense, on the other hand, sought to minimize Gertrude's culpability by attributing her actions to stress, mental illness, and the chaotic nature of her household. One of the most shocking revelations during the trial was the level of involvement by children and teenagers. Gertrude's own offspring, including her eldest daughter Paula, actively participated in the abuse. Paula, who was 17 at the time, admitted to striking Sylvia and contributing to her mistreatment. Even more disturbing was the role of neighborhood children, who were invited into the home to torment Sylvia under the guise of discipline or fun. These children, some as young as 10, inflicted physical harm and humiliation on Sylvia, seemingly desensitized to the suffering they caused. Their participation underscored the ease with which cruelty can spread when left unchecked, particularly in an environment where moral boundaries are blurred. The evidence presented in court was harrowing. Photographs of Sylvia's emaciated and battered body were shown to the jury, leaving an indelible impression on all who saw them. Witness testimonies painted a grim picture of Sylvia's last days, describing her as a broken shell of her former self, too weak to move or even cry out in pain. The courtroom was filled with a mix of outrage and sorrow as Sylvia's story unfolded, revealing the depths of human depravity and the devastating consequences of unchecked power and neglect. Gertrude Baniszewski's behavior during the trial further fueled public outrage. She displayed little remorse, often deflecting blame onto others and portraying herself as a victim of circumstance. Her lack of accountability and apparent indifference to Sylvia's suffering only deepened the sense of injustice felt by those following the case. In May 1966, Gertrude was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. Her daughter Paula was convicted of second-degree murder, while other participants received varying sentences for their roles in the abuse. Despite the convictions, many felt that justice had not been fully served. Gertrude's parole in 1985, after serving just 20 years, sparked widespread outrage and disbelief. Her release was seen by many as a failure of the justice system, a painful reminder that the scales of justice often tip unevenly. Gertrude lived out the remainder of her life in relative obscurity, dying of lung cancer in 1990. The aftermath of Sylvia Likens' case had a profound impact on child welfare laws and public awareness. Her death became a catalyst for change, prompting reforms aimed at protecting vulnerable children and preventing similar tragedies. Social services agencies began implementing stricter protocols for monitoring foster and guardian arrangements, and public awareness campaigns highlighted the importance of reporting suspected abuse. Sylvia's story also underscored the need for community vigilance, reminding society of its collective responsibility to protect its most vulnerable members. The psychological dynamics of the case continued to be studied and debated by experts. Gertrude's ability to manipulate those around her, including her own children and neighbors, highlights the insidious nature of groupthink and the human tendency to conform under pressure. The involvement of multiple perpetrators in Sylvia's abuse raises difficult questions about accountability and the factors that drive ordinary individuals to commit extraordinary acts of cruelty. The case serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of apathy, the corrosive effects of unchecked power, and the devastating consequences of failing to intervene in the face of suffering. Sylvia Likens' legacy is one of both tragedy and resilience. Her story, though marked by unimaginable pain, has inspired countless efforts to protect children and prevent abuse. Advocacy groups, educational initiatives, and legislative reforms have all been driven, in part, by the lessons learned from Sylvia's case. Her name has become a symbol of the fight against child abuse, a reminder of the importance of vigilance, compassion, and accountability. Sylvia Likens' tragic story did not fade into obscurity after the trial. Instead, it became a lasting symbol of the dire need for systemic change and societal accountability. Her death catalyzed profound shifts in child welfare systems, yet the haunting details of her suffering remain a stark reminder of the consequences of negligence and apathy. This final chapter delves into how Sylvia's memory has been preserved, the lessons her case imparts, and the broader implications of the horrors she endured. After the trial, the house at 3850 East New York Street, where Sylvia endured months of unimaginable torment, stood as a silent witness to her suffering. Locals whispered about the house being cursed, a physical embodiment of the evil that transpired within its walls. Some believed the very bricks of the structure held echoes of her cries for help. Despite efforts to rehabilitate the property, the stigma surrounding it never diminished. Eventually, the house was demolished in 2009, erasing the physical reminder of Sylvia's suffering but not the memory of what happened there. One of the most lasting impacts of Sylvia's story has been the evolution of child protection laws. The case highlighted critical flaws in the system, particularly the lack of oversight in situations involving guardianship and foster care. In the 1960s, social services often lacked the resources and authority to intervene effectively in cases of suspected abuse. Sylvia's case brought these deficiencies into sharp focus, leading to legislative reforms that aimed to close these gaps. Today, child welfare agencies operate under stricter guidelines, with greater emphasis on monitoring, accountability, and early intervention. Mandated reporting laws, which require certain professionals to report suspected abuse, gained traction partly because of the public outrage surrounding Sylvia's death. Sylvia's story also became a rallying point for community vigilance. It served as a grim reminder that abuse often thrives in silence and secrecy, enabled by the reluctance of others to get involved. In her case, numerous individuals, including neighbors and school officials, noticed signs of her suffering but failed to act decisively. This collective inaction allowed her abusers to continue their horrific treatment unchecked. Today, awareness campaigns emphasize the importance of speaking up and taking action when abuse is suspected. Slogans like "See something, say something" reflect the lessons learned from cases like Sylvia's, reminding society of its shared responsibility to protect the vulnerable. Beyond systemic reforms, Sylvia's story has also inspired artistic and cultural responses that aim to honor her memory and ensure her suffering is not forgotten. Books, documentaries, and films have delved into the details of her life and death, offering sobering reflections on the darker aspects of human behavior. Each retelling, though painful, serves to keep her memory alive and underscores the importance of preventing similar tragedies. Notably, her case has been featured in numerous psychological studies and criminology courses, where it serves as a case study in the dynamics of abuse, groupthink, and moral failure. One of the most poignant tributes to Sylvia is the memorial erected in her honor. Located in Willard Park, near her final resting place, the memorial features a simple but powerful inscription. This memorial is in memory of a young child who died a tragic death as a result of child abuse. May this memorial serve as a constant reminder to us all that we are responsible for the protection of our children. The memorial has become a place of reflection and mourning, drawing visitors from all over who come to pay their respects and renew their commitment to fighting child abuse. While Sylvia's case brought about meaningful changes, it also exposed uncomfortable truths about human nature and societal dynamics. The involvement of Gertrude Baniszewski's children and neighborhood kids in Sylvia's abuse raises profound questions about the factors that drive individuals to commit acts of cruelty. Psychologists and sociologists have analyzed the case extensively, examining how peer pressure, authority figures, and dehumanization contribute to such behavior. Gertrude's ability to manipulate those around her, turning them into willing participants in her sadistic games, is a chilling example of how power can corrupt and how group dynamics can suppress individual morality. The case also serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked authority. Sylvia's vulnerability stemmed not only from her age and circumstances but also from the societal norms of the time, which often placed unquestioned trust in adults and authority figures. Gertrude's position as Sylvia's caregiver gave her immense power, which she wielded with devastating consequences. The case underscores the importance of empowering children and fostering environments where they feel safe to speak up and seek help. Despite the horror of her story, Sylvia's legacy is one of resilience and change. Her suffering was not in vain. It illuminated the dark corners of society and inspired efforts to create a safer world for children. Advocacy organizations dedicated to preventing child abuse often cite her case as a driving force behind their missions. Her name has become synonymous with the fight against abuse, reminding society of its moral obligation to protect the vulnerable. As we reflect on Sylvia Likens' life and death, her story compels us to confront uncomfortable truths about our own roles in preventing abuse and injustice. It challenges us to remain vigilant, to speak out against wrongdoing, and to ensure that no child suffers in silence. Sylvia's memory lives on, not only in the reforms her case inspired but also in the hearts of those who strive to make the world a safer, more compassionate place. In closing, Sylvia's story is a painful but essential reminder of the consequences of neglect, the power of collective action, and the enduring need for justice. Her life, though tragically short, continues to impact countless others, serving as both a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope. As we honor her memory, let us commit to building a world where every child is safe, valued, and loved, a world where stories like Sylvia's no longer exist.